The original Borderlands at this point is a certified classic amongst fans and sets the stage for looter shooters. However, the user interface and user experience is unfortunately heavily dated and objectively bad. All of the on-screen information is scattered across the screen in a manner that makes very little sense, in addition to some of the UI elements being difficult to see and blends into the in-game world in a very unsavoury manner. The somewhat recent remaster has had improvements to fix a lot of the original issues, however still has some of their own. The UI itself has little to no colour consistency, in addition to having a fairly bland design overall. The user experience is also a big issue, especially when navigating the inventory for the weapon that you want, as the weapon names are needlessly long, only having the weapon type icon and the colour system for the weapons tiers being essentially pointless. Piled on top of that is the default field of view. Most people who are playing will likely not think about going into the settings and altering it, and considering it's very low by default can cause some eye strain in some instances. The in-game UI is, to put simplistic, meta. Using an echo device gives a narrative reason for the user interface while also keeping it out of the game's space. The designated skill tree is at the very least serviceable, with information that's easy to understand. However, if not for the names at the bottom, would be an incomprehensible mess for anyone with any sort of visual impairment. However, the icons have very little issues in general besides certain colours potentially blending into the layout. How I would change the skill tree is by having the names at the top, leave the skill icons as is, but change the colour of the acquired skills to colours that don't blend in as much. From the appearance of the menus, it is quite obvious that it was designed with consoles in mind, which there is nothing wrong with. However, suffers from the same issue as Oblivion for the PC, where the menu works for consoles, but not quite as efficiently on PC. A good side of Borderlands' user experience is its gameplay loop. In its core, Borderlands is a looter shooter with RPG elements, so one of its main draws is in fact the gun, shields, class mods, and a whole lot of loot, which goes into the feedback loop of grinding for rare and unique weapons with varying weapon mods, which on the surface is a positive loop. However, can be quite negative if a player becomes obsessed with getting the absolute perfect weapon or anything else, which can take up the player's time and becomes less fun and more of a tedious task. The reason for these gameplay loops is to drive player engagement and increase total playtime by having the player come back and get back into the overall game flow of fight, level up, loot, compare loot, throw all useless loot away, level up, fight, continue the story, loot, and so on. The way I believe the user experience and user interface should flow goes as follows. Gameplay leads into inventory and playing, inventory leads down into weapon screen, skill tree, map and quests. Starting from weapon screen, you can either equip weapon, hotkey weapon, scrap weapon. Skill tree, obviously selecting skills. Map and quests, you can select quests, use map, or even listen to audio logs. These will then lead into close inventory, which will then lead onto playing. Playing will lead to story and quest, grinding and leveling. Story and quests lead to side quests or DLC, and main quests and optional objectives. Grinding leads to grinding for unique loot. Leveling leads to radiant quests, fighting respawnable bosses, and fighting base enemies. Mass Effect 3 has many flaws, primarily to do with the narrative and the ending. But this is not about that. What is good about Mass Effect 3 is the user interface and the user experience. The base UI is quite appealing to look at, and easy to understand. health and shield / barrier in the middle, health being red and shield / barrier being blue or purple, depending on the player's class of course. In the bottom left corner is an image of the currently equipped weapon along with the ammo counter, along with a visual indication of ammo with a red bar. When the player uses an ability, 2 grey half circles will close into the middle. Under the health bar are 2 images of the player's companions and an image of their hotkeyed abilities. Both abilities and weapons have their own separated selection wheel, which freezes time in-game, besides camera control which allows the player to seamlessly switch out to the equipped ability and weapon. The improvements made by Mass Effect 3's UI were so significant that in the remastered trilogy release recreated the first game's UI entirely in the style of the other 2 games, which in my books is a major improvement. Most of the missions in Mass Effect 3 consist of moving through a linear level and fighting the enemies. However, we'll interrupt these sections with witty dialogue between squad mates and the player, as well as giving the player significant choices which can alter the story, i.e. whether to save a species or commit genocide, allowing for vast replayability. Of course, outside of the choices, most of the levels are excessively linear, meaning for the most part everything is scripted to happen without much player input. This, of course, can be both positive and negative. Mass Effect 3 is filled with little juicy events, which weren't needed, but add more to the player's experience, making the world or galaxy, in this case, feel alive. In fact, one of the main DLCs is pretty much just one juicy event. This can range from hearing little stories going off in the background from NPCs talking amongst each other, support one side of an argument, get a random quest from talking to someone, or even talking with squad mates about whether or not to take an experimental husk head, and talk about using it to play bowling in the storage deck.
Hey, if nobody claims this thing, we could take it with us. You know, for research or, I don't know, whatever.
Alright, just don't tell anybody.
Nice! You think Esteban will let me set up bowling pins in the cargo bay?
A lot of these issues are fixed in later titles. However, for the sake of things, here's how I would personally redesign the user interface. The main issue I had with both the original and the remaster is how dated and unappealing it appeared. So my goal was to streamline it as a whole and fetch it up to the current standard for a shooter. I moved the other player's health bar close to the players to keep it more organised. The key aspect for Mass Effect 3's UI design is the more modern approach to the user interface design, as opposed to something that was outdated and, in general, all over the place. To put simply, I moved some of the widgets into places that make much more sense, such as the quest objectives into the top left corner and moving the co-op partners' health and shield into the bottom left corner, just above the players. I gave everything a white outline to better help contrast against the in-game environment, and I made the compass and minimap a bit more lighter in opacity so then it doesn't fill the screen up as much.